Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webcast, How to Improve Security Visibility and Detection Response Operations in AWS, sponsored by AWS Marketplace. My name is Linda Harrison with the SANS Institute, and I'll be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speakers are Dave Shackelford, SANS instructor and analyst, and Vinay Sukumar, Principal Category Leader for Security Intelligence at AWS. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface. We'll be answering them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Dave.
Awesome. Thanks, Linda, and thanks everybody for joining us. We've got quite a packed agenda for this particular webcast. As I'm sure you guys can imagine, this is a pretty beefy topic. The title probably gave it all away. We're going to endeavor naturally in the course of an hour or so to solve all of your problems that are related to security in the cloud. Isn't that an amazing promise? Okay, I don't know that I'm going to promise that, but I am definitely going to enlighten everybody on some of the awesome things happening out there in the world of security visibility and really the spectrum of detection and response capabilities, and really focus on those types of emerging technologies and capabilities in the cloud that can, I think, really improve things for us. So again, a big agenda. I'm going to go over some very brief sort of basic things here at the beginning, and then I'm going to jump right into it. We're going to start talking about logging. We're going to talk about visibility as sort of a big picture. We're going to talk about enablement for our SOC. I mean, naturally for most enterprise organizations, this is where the sort of eyes and ears security-wise of the organization reside, whether that's virtual or people actually sitting in a room, however it is, right? It's still sort of that central emphasis. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about automation. Now, what's really cool, I'm excited to be joined by the team at AWS here because, really once I've gotten through those topical areas, I'm going to be handing it off to the folks at AWS to basically give you guys the real picture there, because they're seeing this happening with their customers and actually observing some real-world use cases about this taking place. So lots of incredibly awesome stuff for you guys. Let's jump right in and get started today. So, again, a lot of different things that we're going to be touching on and sort of, breaking down here throughout the webcast itself. So there we go. So like I said, I'm going to start off talking a little bit about just the overview. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because I assume for most of you guys coming here and hanging out today, you've got some idea of exactly what the issues probably are. And, I think saying issues really belies that it's just a shift in modality. You're taking core concepts in security and, really, sort of bringing us back to this, the two major areas that we sort of tend to focus on in the world of visibility and monitoring overall are really two, it's probably an oversimplification, I'll say, but I'd say that the two things are, number one, event-driven, and so we're looking at basically getting logs and getting some sort of event data from any number of different places. I'll focus on that here in just a moment. But the other area is behavioral, and I'd say of the two, behavioral has traditionally been the more challenging, just because in order to build out behavioral models and have a better understanding of exactly what types of behaviors we're looking at, what we're trying to do is build enough of a data set to be able to take a look across the spectrum of time. But even more than that, to understand what kinds of behaviors we might be looking for specifically. So there's a whole lot to talk about here, really getting into, number one, what kinds of data do I need to collect and what do I need to actually get in my cloud environment to be able to parse through event data and sort of feed those things into correlation use cases. And then number two, to also determine what kinds of behaviors make sense for us. So the good news is we've got some of the tools really right at our fingertips now to get the job done. If we've been having this conversation 5-7 years ago, as a lot of people's journeys to cloud were just barely beginning and the world of cloud was still sort of maturing over time, I'd say we really probably would have been cobbling things together and it might have looked a lot more like duct tape. Not so much today. I think we actually have the tools needed to accomplish building out a large-scale and effective cloud security monitoring capacity in a number of different ways. So I'm going to be making that case here again over the course of the next few minutes and sort of giving you guys some intel as to how you might go about accomplishing this. So let me go ahead and just jump right into this, kind of topic around logging and event management. And, if you ask the average security person how they feel about logs, it's pretty rare to come across somebody that says, I love logs. They're probably the best thing in my lives, right? If you do meet somebody that's like that, you might want to be careful around them. But all kidding aside, the concept of logging is one that we take, I don't want to say take for granted, but we certainly have come to expect that logs are a part of our lives in the field of security. We have to. So logging and event management, sort of, again, across the spectrum of every asset that we have in the cloud, is still a part of our lives. In other words, I've got to go get workload logs. I've got to get things out of the operating system or perhaps from applications. Great. That's the starting point, I'd say, for just about anything. But now what you also have are, I think, sort of the behavioral logs and sort of the surrounding environment logs that are more enabled through the fabric of the cloud provider in the first place. And so, for instance, in AWS, this is going to be things like CloudTrail, where, I don't want to oversimplify it, but you flip a switch and you have logs and you have a big bucket of data. You've also got network flow logs for your virtual private cloud that can give you indications of behaviors, not only coming into your cloud and leaving the cloud, but also that sort of intra-cloud scenario as well. So starting off with this concept of, cloud control plane and really sort of building on this, this is actually one of the true benefits of cloud, in my opinion. And I think it's easy to settle in on the doom and gloom of, we're moving into this software-defined infrastructure and, everything's different. we're having to completely redo everything we've known. I don't know that that's necessarily true. I think we can bring a lot of the things we've learned and the different types of things we've seen over the course of the years in our own premises. I definitely think that we're not completely losing all that, but we have some new things at our disposal. And the way I always couch this when I'm talking to classes at SANS or if I'm talking to consulting clients is, look, you can't go into your data center right now and flip a switch on the wall and functionally enable an entire logging engine for the entire data center all at once. And you can do that in the cloud. So this is, in my mind, an improvement. Everything that you run in the cloud, everything running in AWS, is attached to that provider backplane, and that backplane is loggable. So you can, in fact, get every single API request coursing through your entire infrastructure. And so this gets everything in the management console, any command line operations through things like the AWS CLI, software development kits, any AWS service interaction is going to get captured in these logs. And what you really end up doing is giving yourself a bucket of logs, right? So I create an S3 bucket, and everything starts going into that. And you'll find, of course, for large enterprises that you can start gathering a lot of log data pretty fast. So naturally, as an organization, you're going to want to take a look and sort of familiarize yourself with the types of logs being generated in the environment and have a better understanding of maybe what kinds of logs are most valid or important to you, what particular event types make the most sense for you to sort of build your observational practices around. And then, go into that whole just general life cycle discussion around logging. How long do I need to keep these logs for? How do I validate their integrity? And the cool thing, again, is that most of those types of controls, in fact, all of those controls are right there within S3. So what you'll have to do is sort of level up a little bit and move, from just the log data to the bucket of where those logs are being stored. But you can enable all those things. So you have controls that you can put in place. You can put identity and access management around the logging engine and that bucket so that you can control who's got access to it and make sure, of course, that nobody can tamper with the logs either. Now, that alone is great. Just having a bucket of logs, how exciting. It's just what you've always wanted in your lives. But, of course, that's only the starting point, because what you'll ultimately also need to do is facilitate those logs being analyzed and being used for any number of different types of, both detection and response activities and workflows that you'll want to build out from that point. So I'd say this is the starting point for us, sort of giving ourselves that visibility into just what in the world is happening in the environment. But after that, we'll definitely want to sort of take it a step further and start enabling and facilitating those logs being used for things. And that's something that I'll get into here in just one second. So, again, this is the starting point, but we're definitely going to take this a little bit further. the next type of logs that we need, which is the actual workloads themselves, workload security events. And so these are obviously going to be related to the different types of things we're running in the cloud. So it's not the cloud plane itself. It's not that sort of back end that's got visibility into service-to-service interactions and other things. It's more the things I'm running. So it might be a Windows server, Linux server, set of these databases, you name it. And this could also include, of course, things like containers and even Lambda functions and so forth in the world of serverless. All of that matters, but we definitely need to ensure that we're capturing the logs from those systems, because obviously the control plane doesn't have visibility into that inherently. So the control plane is where everything's attached, so you can see a system was doing something, or a user was logged in and doing something, or service A talked to service B. All that has merit, and it's important to make sure we get that. But this is sort of the normal, day-to-day logging that most of us are used to, at least as a starting point. Now, when you add in things like container engines and serverless and so forth, that, of course, is a little different. But the bottom line is we need this detail as well. And the good thing is we can, build out a central store for these workload logs in the cloud. And, I get asked this question all the time. Dave, what's the best practice for this? Should I try to be just storing those logs in the cloud, or should I be trying to shuttle them back to my on-premises collection mechanism? That's a tough one to answer, because I think it really depends on where and how you need to make use of those logs. But what I tend to find is there's a tipping point, especially for large organizations, where the sort of overhead involved with trying to pull those logs completely out in their entirety and bring them back to, say, an on-premise store, a lot of times that becomes just entirely too costly and unwieldy to maintain, at least in its entirety. And so it's good that you can enable things like CloudWatch logging repositories within AWS and essentially forward some of those logs over if that's what you'd like to do. Otherwise, of course, you can enable other types of syslog event collectors, or even tie in third-party solutions that can sort of pull those out or analyze them in different ways. But you have a lot of options, which is a good thing. When you get into things like containers and serverless, that's a little bit more cloud native in terms of what you build out in AWS. And so it's usually a good idea to forward those at least to a single collection point first. And that, again, might look like something within CloudWatch and so forth. But getting them to that central engine first, usually a pretty good idea. So this next type of logging, and so this, as somebody that worked in the realm of network engineering for years and years, this was like sort of a godsend when this particular type of logging became able for us to collect. It's a couple years now where VPC flow logs are available. Not necessarily a new capability set within the AWS cloud, but nonetheless, still one of my favorite things, because you can, in fact, enable this sort of behavioral element of all traffic that's communicating, again, both within the cloud and things coming in and going out. And this is phenomenal. Now, again, you've got a lot of log data that tends to come in, especially for a busy sort of cloud deployment environment. But nonetheless, if you want to see, the potential lateral movement cases that are going on, System A talking to System B, never should be talking to System B, that's something that we can hone in on. You can also start detecting things like port scans or unusual recon activity or scanning activity, any type of anomalies or unusual activity that you want to look at least from the networking level. This is, again, that sort of backplane level analysis and collection of exactly that. And so you can start building things on top of that as far as use cases. So you get these sort of three core engines of logging that you can use. So to me, this is sort of the starting point. This is where things start to get more interesting, and you can say, okay, well, now what? Well, now it's time to use this stuff and improve our visibility in the cloud. The whole idea of improving our visibility has to necessarily sort of go beyond just the logging. So it's to get the logs, it's to get event data, and then start figuring out what we're going to do with it and how we're going to make use of this. And so we have tons of other ways that we can do exactly that, whether through augmenting that event data, generating some new types of information that is useful as well. I'll give one example here using Amazon Inspector. And for those of you that have hung out in AWS for some time, I'm sure you're familiar with this, but Inspector is, for all practical purposes, a vulnerability scanner. But it's great in the sense that it ties in to the entire environment natively. So there's no additional sort of pieces and parts that you have to, sort of build out in order to start using this. And it's a nice lightweight scanning engine that can give you some, decent data about what's going on. So you enable this, you can put an agent in place on all of your workloads, and of course the way to do that typically is through and making sure that your images have that installed by default, and then you just enable it and make sure it's turned on. And you've got most operating systems natively supported as well. There's rules templates, there's sort of core CVE findings, etc. And while this may not necessarily overtake or completely supplant a third-party scanning engine that you might want to make use of, there's plenty of good reasons to continue using those. But in this case, what you've got is this completely cloud-native scanning engine that can be put on a schedule and actually feed its output, its result sets, directly to things like CloudWatch logs, where you can take actions based on them, again, in a highly automated way. And I'll get to the concept of automation and sort of weave it back into this narrative towards the end of my discussion section. But Inspector is nice because it's there, it's built in, and certainly can augment and enhance the visibility of exactly what's running in the environment. So again, one of those tools that you'll find very practically useful. Speaking of useful, probably one of my favorite parts of the AWS ecosystem is Config, and it's actually just gotten better progressively. So Config is a configuration monitoring toolkit, and when it was first announced a few years ago, I'm pretty sure I did a sort of victory dance, because I've been looking for that back-end continuous monitoring engine forever, and previous to this, you had to build it yourself. So you'd have to use some other sort of automation and orchestration tools to go do gut checks on the state of things in your environment. And the way I define config is, what's the desired state? What's the desired status of something? So in other words, I can sort of scour across all my S3 buckets and say, are any of you guys public? Because I don't want anything to be public. Or I can scour across all of my EC2 instances and say, hey, are you guys all using the approved AMI that has this AMI identifier? And then of course it comes back and says, well, yes or no, Dave. Obviously it doesn't say it exactly that way, but it's checking for state. And what's cool is that not that long ago, AWS also allowed config to not only just alert you if something is in a state that you don't want it to be in, but it can actually make changes in the environment. So you can do automated remediation if you want to. So that's an optional element of using this service. But I think the most valuable part of this is not only collecting an inventory of what is going on in your environment, because it does. It's, hey, here's everything we see, but it also allows you to check on the state of what's running within that environment as well. And so you can legitimately build continuous monitoring. Additional elements of visibility. So AWS Security Hub, it's not new, but it's newer. So this is one of the services that's been around for a while now, and I've definitely seen people starting to make use of this pretty heavily. This actually ties a lot of other pieces together. So you have a sort of single pane of glass, if you will, at least to some degree, within Security Hub that allows you to, hey, see what's going on in the environment. So we can compare the environment itself to things like CIS benchmarks and some of those configuration checks. But we can also start pulling in and integrating third-party tools that gives us, I'd say, an even more robust dashboard. So if you're using various vendors out of the marketplace and you have good reasons to do that, and I find that for enterprises, if you are already trained on a particular product or you're comfortable with that, and you're able to just sort of take that with you into the cloud, rocking. That's a great thing operationally and potentially from the functionality standpoint here in Security Hub as a place that you can start tying that in and, again, give yourself that more full spectrum of visibility. Guard Duty is sort of the guardrails type of service in the background in my mind. What it does is ties together some of those events and data and add some additional data on top of that. So it's pulling in, things like your CloudTrail events, pulling in things like VPC flow log information, as well as DNS lookups and some additional third-party intelligence that's provided to AWS from partners, and gives you some, sort of visibility into behaviors in the environment. Awesome. So this thing runs in the background and essentially says, hey, Dave, looks like something's shady going on here. Hey, you're talking to a sort of known or suspected malicious IP space on the internet. Well, I want to know that, and certainly in a large, busy environment, having that visibility and then in an automated way in the background, this should be a primary function that SOC teams enable as soon as they start making use of AWS for building out cloud infrastructure. Guard Duty, in my mind, should be a mandatory type of service that you enable. So Amazon Detective is an awesome service that I'm excited about. Essentially, this is going to collect and aggregate logs across AWS resources and perform some analysis on them to look for some behavior anomalies and other things. So exactly what it sounds like. Detective is going to give us, I think, sort of that deeper level of visibility into root causes, not just for security. I mean, security is sort of where this lives, but I think you're going to find, accidental mistakes being made, or people, uploading things or making changes that they maybe didn't realize was going to cause a problem. And this is going to give us sort of that backtracking ability to be able to go there. So yet another service that is sort of being built on Amazon's very large-scale infrastructure and sort of capacity for processing lots of data and finding those needles in haystacks that would be very difficult for us to do on our own. So again, just another tool that we can put in the toolkit and really make use of. So I think all of that is sort of leading us to this notion of enabling the SOC, or essentially putting the SOC in a better position to not only see what the heck is going on out there, but to be able to perform response activities as well, or at least initiate those workflows as we need. And there's a couple different keys to this, right? Sifting through events and so on, which is defining the priorities. So for instance, if you have serverless infrastructure running or serverless workloads running in the cloud, right? You've got some functions in Lambda that you're running, but they're not your most sensitive or critical. Well, that might not be a priority, even if you see some of the events coming from there. Again, you might deprioritize that in favor of critical workloads or areas of your cloud environment that deal with more sensitive types of, either data or, users or both. But that's something that's subjective. You've still got to sort of have some business sense on what is important to you in the background and add some context to that. Tuning alerts. There is no substitute for going through and just, sort of getting in and getting your hands dirty and finding out what kinds of alerts are being generated. And, I tell people this all the time, this just takes time. You really have to give your SOC team time to learn the types of API calls and nomenclature that's in there that, is going to tell you a story. Because there are some very specific areas that you should always, I think, be focusing on. I'll give you guys a couple examples of those here in a minute. But there's just no substitute for the teams themselves getting in and starting to learn this. I'd say focusing on accounts, especially any sort of service accounts or IAM user accounts, should definitely be a starting point. And the reason for that is most accounts, it really should be an unusual activity after a while for somebody to be logging into your management console in like the web interface. That should be an exception versus a rule. So if I see that, yeah, I want to know what's going on and who that user was and certainly what they were doing. Same thing goes for any service accounts that are part of your deployment pipelines or service-to-service interactions or application use cases. You should know those. I should know exactly what this user account or service account should be doing, and I should be able to tie that explicitly to follow-up behaviors. So these are some of the starting points that I always tell people to dig into. I mean, number one, and even though it sounds silly, trust me, build out a workflow for AWS giving you a phone call. I mean, like, what's the likelihood of AWS calling you up and saying, hey, you might want to pay attention to this? Well, hopefully it doesn't happen, but don't assume it won't either. So make sure that if that call comes in, or if an email notification comes in to a designated contact for an account, the root owner or what have you, you've got some sort of an intake mechanism and follow-up that goes along with that. So that's a pretty easy one conceptually, but make sure that you don't overlook it. I'd say any IAM activity, as I mentioned, certainly focusing in on the API calls in things like CloudTrail logs, and I'll get to more of that here in just a second. That's a big focus. But the final one I want to mention, and certainly an important one, billing alarms. This should be one of the first things you enable as you're building out your cloud infrastructure, is thresholds that tell you when you've hit certain amounts of billing. So the entire cloud is a billable platform, but you should know within a range what you're spending. It doesn't mean you're going to be perfect at it. It may take a few months to get a sense of what your range looks like, but the minute you feel comfortable with that, build out a sort of a tiered threshold for billing alarms that let you know if you're spending more than you anticipated by a specific point in time. These are some examples that I will give for some prioritization areas, and they really are just examples, and I would certainly not be offended if any of you disagreed with some of the things I've listed. This is just based on some of my experience working with SOC teams, but I'd say, anything being launched from an unapproved template or containers that are coming from unapproved images, I'd say that's a priority because, again, it could cause operational problems as much as anything else. Launching assets in unapproved regions, that should be a huge red flag. You should disable all those regions, of course, but if somebody doesn't disable a region for whatever reason and somebody launches something there, high priority. It's usually what we tend to find with people doing cryptocurrency mining and all sorts of shady behavior once they break into an account. Modification of IAM at all. Disabling things like the logging within the cloud control plane. So if you turn off CloudTrail, that in and of itself generates a log called stop logging. And that should be a high priority type of API call. And again, as I said, logins to the web console, particularly unauthorized, I mean, that's definitely a high severity type of event that you should be paying attention to. I'd say priority 2, sort of after that, you're building on some of this to some degree, right? You're saying, okay, I'd say most people tend to agree with these as priority 1 types of alerts, but there's definitely lots of others that you could emphasize. Any unusual user behaviors, updating or changing images, even authorized logins to the web console should be something you pay attention to as far as follow-up activities. People changing any of your serverless configs, you want to know this. It doesn't mean it's malicious. You should have an sort of approved workflow for how that happens, but you want to know it. Anybody changing or adding encryption keys. Changing encryption keys is not necessarily something you're likely to see unless you schedule it for deletion, for example. That should be something that's approved as part of a workflow. But somebody adding an encryption key doesn't necessarily mean that bad things are happening. It's just something you should be paying attention to. I'd say security groups or network access control lists, your networking configs, any changes to those certainly should also be priorities. So you can scramble these up in your own prioritization scheme as much so as you want, but I tend to find everything in this sort of trifecta of different prioritization is important in one way or the other. Now, building out a cloud monitoring workflow, this should be pretty much common sense to a lot of you, I think, in the industry. And so I did try to keep this relatively simplistic just in terms of tracing it through. But, you start with logging, you put that into a monitoring engine of sorts that facilitates getting that into more automation techniques and so on. And then you build out playbooks for detection and response as a result of that. And again, the cool thing is you really have all the tools at your disposal through both cloud native and third-party capabilities to be able to sort of build this out, in my mind, maybe even more effectively and efficiently than you could on premise. So you've got a lot of different things in CloudTrail, and as long as you feed it to a tool that can sort of parse that data and trigger some after effects, whether automated or simply alerting, these are just examples of APIs that, again, going back to the examples I just gave a minute ago, give you that specific syntax to sort of look for. So again, console logins. Yeah, I want to know about that. Stop logging. Yeah, I definitely want to know about that because it should be, all hands on deck the minute somebody actually tries to or successfully stops our CloudTrail engine. Authorizing security group ingress. Somebody just opened up a new rule that allows traffic in to our workloads. Yeah, I want to know what that is and hopefully tie it back to something that has been approved. In the world of serverless, you have other examples too. If somebody tries to delete a function, well, yeah, I want to know about that. That's definitely a potentially high severity situation. Updating function code. And that's a great example of a fairly stealthy attempt that an attacker could perpetrate trying to insert something malicious or unusual into your function, and it keeps running. So you may be doing who knows what sort of in the background, loading into memory caches and even developing things like sort of memory persistent malware, all as part of your existing functions. I definitely want to have some visibility to that. So looking at some of these different types of controls that can help us start locking things down in the environment and getting some better perspective on this. I'd say, ops and engineering teams definitely need to build out controls around identity management in particular. Good things have come about in the last couple of years to really facilitate this. I mean, the new AWS IAM Access Analyzer is, again, sort of a godsend because it really does give you reporting on what privilege assignments you've got. We need to be focused on different resources that are running and resource utilization. So if we see memory spikes or CPU utilization spikes that are unusual, again, that could indicate compromise within the environment. And then, as I said earlier, different regions and what's going on in those regions we should really be focused on. And even the largest organizations I tend to work with don't use every region, and that's probably going to stay that way. So I'll finish up my discussion area with a brief mention of SOAR and the role of automation. And I firmly believe you can't get there in the world of security in the cloud without some degree of automation. It doesn't mean you need to automate everything at all, but you definitely need to do some automation. And that includes areas like identifying and correlating alerts, suppressing false positives, even going so far as to perform investigations and different types of threat hunts, opening incident tickets, you name it. You can come up with some interesting both passive and active or reactive types of use cases around automation here. And so I'll just sort of dig in briefly and give you a few. This could be even things like automated DNS lookups if you see a domain name not seen before. Great, I love that idea. Just go give me the information about it so I can dig in a little more. Looking for indicators of compromise across my entire system spectrum. I can actually build that entirely through tools like Systems Manager within AWS. I could even perform forensic imaging of disk and memory automatically, entirely automatically, through detection of specific events. I could build network access controls that quarantine or even automatically block outbound C2 channels or suspected C2 channels, at least giving us some breathing room. So you can start coming up with these ideas. And then the question is, well, how do I get there, right? Like, what's the engine that helps me actually build that out? And, fortunately, you have a ton of tools. So just to give a very simple workflow, you build out things like AWS CloudTrail and VPC flow logs. You have everything sort of funnel into a core or central engine like, say, CloudWatch, which is really sort of that pivot point for a lot of things. And then you trigger activities based on this. So you could easily feed this off to like a Lambda function, or you could even have a partner solution like Sumo Logic or others that are, sort of tied into this. You can build out more SIEM-like capabilities in a cloud-native way. And then ultimately, whether that third phase is automatic or semi-automatic, again, that's up to you. It's really more your appetite for the risks that could ensue if you automatically quarantine or shut something down or what have you. If nothing else, you could just trigger a vulnerability scan to get more detail, or simply send yourself an alert back to the SOC so you can follow up and sort of do things thereafter. So next steps, really, and I just want to emphasize, this is sort of the beginning of this. There's a lot of tools available to us. SOC teams can definitely do a whole heck of a lot in the world of cloud, depending on their sort of willingness to just jump in and the time that they're given to jump in and learn the events and learn the different types of tools that are available and sort of start building out those workflows together. But stick around, because I think you're going to find that Vinay has actually some great examples and some very specific things to tie back to exactly what I've been talking about here. So I'll hand it off to you guys.
All right, thank you, Dave. And what I want to do is to double-click on a few of the services that you mentioned with respect to this use case, which is visibility, detection, response in AWS, as well as talk about the integrations that they have and how it all ties into other solutions that's available through Marketplace, and look at some of those case studies. So as you can imagine, there are a number of AWS services that are available. It's nicely laid out here in the NIST framework, so it's always easy to wrap your head around which service can help you where. In this session, I'll be looking at the three services highlighted here, which is Amazon GuardDuty, AWS Security Hub, and Amazon Detective. So GuardDuty, Dave already mentioned, but the nice thing I like about GuardDuty is a single click, it automatically starts collecting the underlying relevant data sources. So your CloudTrail data, your DNS logs, your VPC flow logs, all of this data is actually automatically collected, and then you have machine learning and statistical analysis performed on those. So you have a managed threat detection service that is ready to go for you. But once this data is ready, you can then forward this over to a third-party solution or another AWS services to act on this or do something with this information. So that's where a service like AWS Security Hub comes in, where it acts as a single place to aggregate all your relevant security threats and findings and present you a view on your security posture. It also has the ability to ingest data from your third-party solutions. So now you have a single place to not only view your threats, but also prioritize and have a consolidated representation of overall security. Security Hub also brings you ability to run compliance benchmarks. For example, CIS benchmarks is available out of the box, and so therefore you can not only run benchmarks based on AWS best practices, but also industry standards. But that's great. Now I have a finding, and this finding is available within Security Hub. And in order for me to remediate this, or if it is a simple thread that is signature-based that I need to act on, I can quickly automate this workflow by leveraging Amazon's CloudWatch, right? So using CloudWatch events, I can trigger a custom action that can then either fire off a message or a notification to a chat client, email, or another ticketing system, or even to your SIEM or SOAR platform to act on that information, which is great. But then, whenever you see an indicator of compromise or a threat identified, oftentimes makes you wonder what else could be going on. How could this threat then move laterally within your environment? Who else could be exposed to the threat? So in order to do that, oftentimes we are having to deal with terabytes of data that you need to first pull out, combine, and then start analyzing them. And these days you'd have to look at mathematical models to run and understand what's normal and where the anomalies exist. So this is where our newest offering in security comes in, which is Amazon Detective, which once enabled, it automatically takes all the underlying data contributing to these findings and then creates and it applies statistical analysis, machine learning, and also graph theory. So it very intelligently brings together all the different entities and represents them in a graphical fashion so that you can very quickly, from a single finding, drill into all the contributing factors and the other entities that might be affected or involved in this use case. Moving forward, you would see that you have, let's see, there we go. So in this case, I wanted to highlight an example of integration that we have with GuardDuty. And Sumo Logic has a very a neat integration with Amazon GuardDuty. They have a service called Global Intelligence Service. And what this does is it's able to seamlessly collect GuardDuty data from across multiple customer environments. And this data then it uses to create a baseline of what's normal, what's expected, and ways to dig deeper into the long tail so that you can easily identify a needle in a haystack situation. So it generates continuous machine learning and statistical baselines, and you can define KPIs and KRIs, which is key performance indicators and key risk indicators, from the GuardDuty data. So customers of Sumo Logic and AWS use this to benchmark, prioritize, and optimize security configuration and detection for their environments. So it actually comes up, Sumo Logic provides a benchmark app. If you haven't seen it, go take a look. What it allows you to do is it compares all active threats in your account and determines the significant contributors. So you're not only looking at the threats in the context of your environment, now you're able to assess them at a global level and say where you stand. Another area where this is applied is it's not just with threats, but also security configuration. So you can look at global baselines for Sumo customers on how they are from a configuration perspective and optimize your own configuration and improve the overall baselines. And the best part about all of this is with GuardDuty, it's analyzing tens of billions of events all the time, and it's happening behind the scenes in your existing AWS environment, whether and there is no additional footprint, so there's no agent, there's no software that you need to install and configure to get this going. Now, digging a little bit deeper here, the challenge that we have posed with is the variety of sources and the volume of logs that you're seeing. So for example, on the left-hand side here, you see a number of solutions from firewalls to vulnerability management systems to endpoint solutions. All of these solutions, they are also available through Marketplace, and I can imagine our customers deploying, and we have hundreds of thousands of users subscribing to these security solutions. And once the data is generated, now you need a solution like AWS Security Hub and GuardDuty to distill through this and give you insights. But it can take you so far, and then once you want to automate this and dig deeper for advanced threat investigations, that's where your solutions like your typical SIEMs, Sumo Logic, Splunk, IBM Security, all of these guys would come into play. And then you can automate the response using their SOAR platform. So digging a little deeper into Sumo Logic, and why do our customers need a solution like Sumo Logic, and what are they seeing today, right? So like I mentioned, the biggest challenge is the volume of data that is generated each day and the variety of sources that can quickly grow as well. So in order for you to apply your analytics on the scale that is required, it takes a lot of effort and an excellent architecture. In this case, Sumo Logic, they are able to process over 100 petabytes of data and handle 20 plus million queries daily. And they do this on data that they pull within AWS from your CloudTrail, GuardDuty, Inspector. All of these sources comes together. And they're able to distill those thousands of log lines into 3 to 4 cluster patterns through their log reduce and log compare functions. So we're talking about getting to actionable insights, and which is basically more signal and less noise, right? Something that you can act on. So let's look at an example. And in this case, we'll be looking at Genesys Telecommunications, where they're looking to automate their entire DevSecOps pipeline. And just to give you an introduction, Genesys is an omni-channel customer experience and contact center solution. And they handle billions of customer interactions each year. These are conversations on channels like chat, phone, emails, and their solutions are built 100% on AWS and are also available to be bought by a marketplace. So Genesys Pure Cloud application, which is one of the 3 in their portfolio, operates at a tremendous scale. So let's just lay it out here as a challenge. So they have over 300 microservices running across multiple AWS accounts, over 6,000 EC2 instances running across 7 regions, and more than 3 terabytes of logs daily. And if you include dev and test environments, it would be more than 6 terabytes of data that's being generated daily. So Genesys, as part of their automation of their CI/CD pipeline, they have immutable images. Every container has a golden image. Apps are built on top. OS is hardened, and they've automated vulnerability scanning, leveraging Amazon Inspector. So they've done a great job, but they need to scale this and realize efficiencies at the scale. So what they found was with Sumo Logic and their out-of-the-box parsers and analytics, they were able to drastically reduce investigation time, and the ability to chain and unchain investigations really helped them identify relevant activities, and the rules that they were able to use was able to scale across millions of records. It is also, they found that the alerts that they were getting after this were better, and they were seeing fewer false positives, and they had enhanced visibility into their CI/CD pipeline. So, and overall as a business, Genesys benefited with the ability to build their core software faster and worry less about security through leveraging Sumo Logic and also automating a lot of their work. In the next example, we will look at Iconic Engine. And for those of you who's not familiar with Iconic Engine, take a look. They have some really cool solutions, and they have an end-to-end extended reality platform solution, which manages the full workflow for reimagining how interactive and cinematic experiences are distributed, exhibited, and consumed for location-based entertainment. So these would be anything from your 4D or 5D cinematic experiences. It could be your VR gaming or mobile applications in the VR. So really cool stuff. And the challenge that they were trying to resolve for is they had a limited set of internal resources to focus on security and operations here, and they needed a solution that can be easily deployed, required minimal operational support, and could protect them against advanced insider and cyber threats, right? So insider threats were something that they wanted to make sure that they got against. So they chose Securonix, and Securonix has been a leader in the UBA, user behavior analytics space, and they have successfully extended their machine learning and behavior anomaly detection capabilities to a full SIEM solution built on AWS Cloud. So with minimal operational overhead, rapid deployment, and no hardware infrastructure cost, Iconic Engine was able to save thousands of dollars in capital cost, time, and resource expenses. And they were able to readily leverage machine learning and behavior analytics that Securonix provided, along with out-of-the-box connectors and use cases. They were able to hit the road running. So this is great. They were, in the 2 case studies we saw, we were able to detect and automate some way. But then in order to fully automate all the tasks required. So an IOC is detected, and then you want to then capture all the relevant data from the background, and you want to kick off a playbook. That's where the need for a SOAR solution comes in. So in this example, we have a case study where we have Pokémon that's leveraged Demisto to help them with their SOAR use case. A quick overview for those of you who don't know Pokémon. Where have you been? Pokémon company actually manages the brand Pokémon, and whether it be in movies and videos, your phone applications, it tracks to protect the IP as well as protect the privacy of their users. Significant of their user base is children, so it's important. And while doing that, they needed to scale their AWS environment efficiently with a small analyst team and automate everything. And you can see a theme forming here in all the case studies. Apart from the volume of logs and everything that we talk about, the lack or the shortage of skill set and smaller teams are something that every department, every company is having to deal with. And when you move to the cloud, the scope of what you need to work with has improved, and you can effectively deliver good solutions with a smaller team. So they also wanted to, apart from security, they also wanted to provide value to other technology departments. So InfoSec could become the source of truth when it comes to any questions pertaining that depends on a lot of data being crunched. So they said, okay, how do I automate? So I'm getting a lot of data. How do I automate as much as possible so my analysts are spending only time on those that require manual intervention and further analysis? So they implemented Demisto, and it was used to automate and standardize the entire process through a codified playbook. And they used a combination. In this example, if you look at it, they have IOCs being detected possibly from a Sumo Logic or a Securonix or one of the other solutions. And it could be an IP address that it found which needs to be blacklisted. So here they leveraged Amazon's SQS and AWS Lambda for the cloud component, and also the Palo Alto network firewalls on-prem, and be able to push and publish these blacklisted IP addresses in an automated fashion to go and solve for this. They also have other active use cases that they have implemented, including phishing enrichment and response, employee onboarding, and Amazon EC2 and account compromise detection. So next up, this is the last case study we'll be looking at today, and I'd like to highlight a really cool new born-in-the-cloud solution, Sonral Security, and their platform, Identity and Data Protection Platform. And this is brought to you. Sonral is actually by the founders of IBM QRadar, so they have a lot of experience in the analytics space. And the premise is that you have hundreds of applications sitting inside AWS or any environment for that matter, and these environments and these applications could reside across a variety of environments, and could be your sandbox environment, your a dev or pre-prod environment, or your production environment. But when it comes to security, often there is a heavy focus on the production environments, where there is usually a distracted or minimal focus on the rest of the environments. So the issues that we have found is even a low privilege account could pose a serious threat through privilege escalation. So how do you get visibility into the access path to critical data through identity, network access, who can access or which workload can access critical data, and which workloads are accessing today, and how is it, is it coming through native permissions, or is it coming through assumed or inherited permissions through privilege escalation? So in this case, we are looking at RMS, which is Risk Management Solutions. They're a world leader in catastrophe risk modeling. So if you think of natural disasters or man-made disasters, could be floods, it could be terrorist activities, or like we are seeing today, the spread of a dangerous virus. Now, they are able to help financial institutions and public agencies understand, quantify, and manage the risk. In this case, RMS in their AWS cloud environment wanted greater visibility into what is happening in their cloud, whether these accounts were configured appropriately, and they wanted greater insights into how data could be accessed across these environments. So Sundry platform, as soon as it's deployed, it highlighted three key areas of concern right away. So number one being tactical issues and platform configurations that needed remediation. There were some unmanaged legacy accounts that were interacting with RMS core cloud accounts, and they needed to address that. And also, they found gaps in security best practices that needed to be addressed at the development level. So these issues included things like key rotation issues, open network groups, and identities that were too over-permissioned. So if you look at it, they're approaching visibility and security in the cloud entirely from an identity perspective and account management perspective, because that's the world of cloud. So it's a very interesting solution. So now they're able to understand the interactions and the originating identities. RMS was able to identify and establish trust relationship between all of these accounts. And the compliance and platform posture and the gaps that they found were quickly addressed as Sundry was able to identify the problems at their source. So a very neat solution. And why Marketplace? I've mentioned Marketplace a few times. All of the solutions that we talked about today are available through Marketplace. So number one, Marketplace is built to remove friction from procuring and deploying software into AWS Cloud. So if you're an AWS user and if you're looking to deploy solutions, my recommendation would be to first take a look at Marketplace to see if that solution is there, because we work with vendors to make sure the solution is ready, is available in a fashion that is cloud ready. And also not just the deployment and the application usage itself, but also how the billing models work. So just like the infrastructure flexibility that AWS offers, from software purchases, you can buy software in a pay-as-you-go model. So you can pay by hours, hourly, monthly, yearly. You can do contracts. And we also have packaged these solutions as quick starts, give you a template that you can readily deploy and get started and hit the road running. And or we have SaaS solutions that are automatically integrated into the AWS services, and you can get running by just a few clicks. And more importantly, Marketplace has a team of solutions architects who understand AWS architecture, who understand the services that are available, and also the third-party solutions. Now, if you need help in terms of understanding what are the right questions to ask and how to architect and what are the key issues to tackle and how to go about doing them with the available toolkit, definitely you can reach out to one of the AWS solution architects under Marketplace. Now, as you can see, there are a few handful of solutions listed here on the Find section, so you can find a number of solutions. There are hundreds of security solutions available, and I would strongly recommend taking a look at some of our SIEM and SOAR vendors available and solutions that are posted like Sumo Logic for your visibility and detection response use cases. And also, if you're looking for new solutions, I would say go and give it a try. There are a lot of these vendors who provide free trial options for you, and or you can bring your own license. If you have an existing solution, you can migrate your application into the cloud, apply your existing license, and get going. And if you're looking for a new solution, you can possibly run a POC for really small dollars. And of course, deploy as a SaaS or AMI, Amazon Mission Image, Cloud Formation Template, or containers. So we have solutions available as containers or tools that are container ready that could be deployed within a container. In summary, if you look at it, consider adopting SIEM and SOAR solutions. I know Dave touched on it, and I've emphasized and shown you case studies. There is a lot of good video material and more deeper discussions around these case studies available. So do go take a look at them, and make SIEM and SOAR as part of your core security strategy. And leverage AWS services like GuardDuty, Security Hub, Amazon Detective to enhance your visibility and threat detection. And look at what current tools you have and whether they are ready for the cloud and how it will fit as you migrate into the cloud. One good example to see if a vendor is cloud ready and doing well with AWS is if you see them publishing newer products within Marketplace. That's a good indicator on how aligned and in tune they are with the cloud solution and cloud space. With that, I will conclude my presentation.